Anybody there?
Boy, this really sucks. Huge delay. Okay, testing 1, 2, 3. All right. So today we're covering the last study in the book of Genesis, and it's called Vayeji. All right. Now let me see if this is working better. I apologize. I'm doing a test, and I am trying to see how this works out with other people. Okay. Um, cool beans. So back to what I was saying. Um, I am covering Vayehi. I am talking about First of all, this is just exciting because I've never done live YouTube at the same time. I have no idea how this is all going to work out, but I'm going to have fun with it. So here's what's interesting. We've gone through the book of Genesis. We've covered quite a bit, and otherwise known as Bereshit. Last week, we talked about what happens when money is no longer in existence, meaning the actual attachment of the currency that was being used in Egypt had stopped. And so now there was a need to trade, and therefore they traded for credit. What I mean by this is that was the first time that a interest rate was set. That was the first time that a fiat money was used. That was the first time that people sold all their holdings. So they sold their properties. They sold the animals. They sold then their houses. They sold their land. And when they ran out of all of those things to sell, they sold one more thing: their capacity for labor. By selling their capacity for labor, they went into a credit debt system. So now they were getting a benefit from the state or the kingdom of Egypt for that labor that they were going to eventually produce. And the taxes was 20% or 1/5 of everything that they produced had to go back to Pharaoh. All right. So Joseph brokered the deal, and because that was his job, and he passed it all on. So they had to write, they had to sign title over. So they had to sign a deed over to the state, to the country, to the kingdom, and that's how it all started. So what does that mean? It means that today we're in the same system. We have a debt system. Look at Robert Kiyosaki. Look at all the great ones that talk about finances, and you'll find out that they're discussing this thing very clearly. So the dollars, the cash, the checks that you receive are not really what you think they are, because money doesn't exist. In 1933, the business of money changed. And so they made it at that time, they disconnected the gold value of every single American dollar. And it went into what is known as fiat, which is a fake, a different system. Then eventually we got credit cards. Well, we had them back, eventually we got credit cards. Eventually, remember the time when, time is money and blah, blah, blah. And now we're at the point where you no longer receive a physical check that represents dollars, but you actually receive a direct deposit, which is a digital transaction that is supposed to equal. So you see how no money is being transacted other than you promise to work for a certain value, and that value gets translated based upon your effort. That is the highest taxable income bracket that you could be, and the lowest gains possible for you. This is the system that we've been in for a very long time. Okay, I'm comparing what happened back thousands of years ago to what's going on today, and I'm making a parallel to these things, that this is nothing new under the sun. Now, I want to get to another issue. The issue today, what I've titled this particular teaching, is called the being comfortable in the opposites. So today's reading is called Parashat, which means portion, and is called Vayeji, which is translated into the English as "and he lived." Interestingly enough, it says "and he lived." Well, who was he? And he lived what? It begins, and he lived 17 years in Egypt. Now, why is this important? It's important because you have to understand that story, he says he lived for 17 years, and he died at 147 years of age. Then it talks about Joseph, and then it talks about Joseph's death as well. So even though the title is "and he lived," yet we hear the story of two people, two infamous people that are actually their death. And so I want to cover a little bit about that. And then I'm going to hone in on chapter 50. So it starts at the end of chapter 47 and goes all the way through chapter 50. I'm going to hone in on chapter 50. But before we go there, let me just give you the layout. Okay, so the father, Jacob, is dying. His name is Israel. And so he was first Jacob, and then he became Israel. Um, and then he comes to Egypt, which was a foreign land, and there he lives. So what happens in chapter 51, which is very super interesting to me, it says, verse 2, then Joseph instructed his servants to embalm his father. So he went through the rites of mummification, and it took 40 days for that process, plus the Egyptians mourned him for a total of 70 days. So 40 days of preparation, 30 days of mourning him was the Egyptian way, which is a total of 70. 70 is an important number in the scriptures, in the Torah, because it always refers to the number 70 should always in your mind tell you it has to do with the 70 nations that are outside of Israel. So now, after the 70 days, what's interesting is they are involved in a carriage. There's a ton of dignitaries that go down, and so what it says is when they came to the threshing site. Let me see. Yeah, 50. Well, we jump to verse 10. I apologize for that. So what happened is that as Joseph sent his whole household, all his 12 brothers, everybody, right? They're going. So to the onlooker, it looks like an Egyptian burial, and they're going to the land of Canaan, which is going to be eventually, that is the promised land, and eventually it's going to become, what is known as Israel proper. And so now we have a condition where people are looking. Who's looking? Well, the Canaanites, because they're the ones that lived there at the time, and they are watching this procession of all kinds of high level, dignitaries making a procession to come into this particular burial place. The land was properly purchased through Abraham several hundred years ago in order for the families to be buried there. So this is a burial plot. Why is this interesting? Because it talks about making plans for your death, having, what we call today life insurance or death insurance. So Abraham made that possible for his family members. Okay. So that's where the man Jacob was going to get buried. So he was wrapped as an Egyptian in a particular type of mummification sarcophagus and gets taken there. As far as everybody that is watching, he was an Egyptian, period. So that's why it says that when they saw that, they realized this must be an important person because of all the people that came along. When they get there, then they do the Shiva, which is the known today the Jewish way of mourning the dead, which is for 7 days. And there's a lot of allegories, a lot of really cool stories behind that as to what it is and what it could mean. And at this point, I'm not going to really get into all those pieces. But I'll say this, that there was a transition in between, at the very nothing. It was Egyptian because he lived in Egypt all the way until they got to the land, to the proper place. And at that point, it switched into a Hebraic, Jewish, Israeli style of burial. Okay, so then guess what happens? Um, so now that Joseph's brothers are looking at the situation, they go, "Holy crap! Now that dad is dead, it's gonna be like Godfather, and our brother's gonna take vengeance on every single one of us." And so they're freaking out. Joseph says to them, "No, man, you know what? Um, that's not the case. But be assured I'm not going to hurt you. Be assured that I'm not going to be doing you wrong, because all of this was done with a purpose that I didn't realize until a certain time." Now, I added that I didn't realize because in the last week's discussion, we see that Joseph said, "Now I see that God had intended this for good." So he has matured. But Joseph is now the godfather. Joseph is now the main man, the guru. He is the patriarch. And so everybody has to come to him. And that's why in scripture, in later on, it says the brothers came to him and said, "Your father passed away. Now please forgive your servants who were the children of your father." And so strange language, because what they're saying is, we honor the fact that you're the dude that dad left in charge, and therefore you can do whatever, and we're willing to be your slaves or your employees, actually. And he said, not that way, man. We're family, and we're gonna work out under we're under a new deal, my deal, which is a promise I made to you guys when dad was alive. Okay, now what I like to tell you is that the word Canaan is very interesting because it has 5 different tribes inside the Canaanites, and in there, each one of them, you should look up the definition. I'm not going to cover them today, maybe some other time, but each one of them have something to do with mercantile proficiencies and with control. And so today, the Canaanites are still among us in a psychological way and an emotional way. And most of the things that are done, most of the transactions outside of silver and gold are really a Canaanite system. I'm gonna drop that dime there, and you're gonna have to just either dig into it or seek for more information. We can talk about that later. So Canaan, all right. Now then, what happens is in verse 20, he says, "You devised this against me, yet Elohim, he devised it for good in order to accomplish all that has happened this day." My dad being buried and everything else. Listen to what verse 19 says, which is really powerful. Um, I don't know if people are trying to get in or don't know how to use the chat. Please use the chat for any comments, and write whatever questions you have there, whether that's there or YouTube. I think it's better if you do a Zoom, because I have to manage 2 separate screens. Anyways, I do appreciate the comments. It's just that I'm running at one by myself and I can't run to the text. Okay, back to my story. So listen to what it says in verse 19. Joseph replied to them, "Do not fear, for I'm in place of Elohim." And so, but in the Hebrew, it really says this, that Elohim ani, I am Elohim. So people of different faiths will freak out and they'll go, "How can he possibly call himself God?" Because the word Elohim means majesty, means God. It means, like, it could mean a judge, a very important person. And later on in the scripture, it says, "Are you not Elohims? Are you not, masters and gods and things of this nature?" So our concept of humanity is incorrect. We were created to be the very uh, magnus opus of all of creation, to have relationship at the highest level. And so some of our sages say about Jacob is that and this is very interesting, related to what I'm saying right now. They say that Jacob, or back then, up until that point, nobody got sick. The first time that the words "your father is not healthy," "your father is sick," "he's not well," appears in this particular one. But prior to that, through the whole book of Genesis, those words don't appear. You're sick, right? Sick unto death, dying. So Jacob was able to pull upon the worlds outside that we cannot see, but are very real, and he pulled for the first time death voluntarily in order to show us that you the signs of you losing your peace, the sign of you losing track of how you're supposed to walk with the Most High, is you're losing life, you're being sick. And so that's why I believe this is called "and he lived," not because he died, but rather because he chose to do something to create a better environment. So that's why is it a better environment? Because if you're not aware that you're going in the wrong direction, think about this. When you're on purpose, you have high energy, high flux, high everything. You barely need to sleep. You're able to hyper focus on things. But when you're depressed, your brain is scattered, your thoughts are scattered, you sleep a lot. Why? Because you are outside of your purpose. And so the deeper teaching is that Israel was teaching us, when you lose your purpose, then this is going to happen to you. He says and watch what he says to Pharaoh in the very beginning. Pharaoh says, "Hey, how old are you?" And he says, "Long and bad have been my days, and I've lived to 100 and da 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 da," right? So 130. So now the reason why the parasha says "and he lived 17" is because the word 17, or the number 17, equals the word good in Hebrew. The word tov, when you add the gematria, the equivalent number, it becomes the word good. So he said, "Oh, my life's been long and bad, but it was all good." And from this little play of words and numbers, we draw what I was just telling you about, that depression and anxiety and the loss of energy and even getting old is part of a symptom that we are now no longer walking in our path. We have too much constraints in our mind, too many opposites, right? It's unholy to do this, and I can't do that, and this, that, and the other. And you know what? We become religious. And now it comes to the very core of the piece that I want to share with you guys today. So pay attention, okay? Um, Thank you so much for participating. It looks like I don't have any chats right here. Let me do, before I move on to the next phase, I want to double check technical issues. Let's see, do we have anything on the chat? Okay, no comments on YouTube. Let's move on. All right, so listen to what he says, Joseph, again, verse 21. "So now, do not fear. I myself shall sustain you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke to their hearts. He didn't speak to their mind. He spoke to their heart. Again, this is making reference that if you are not at peace within yourself, the worst pillow is a uncontrolled mind, versus the most comfortable pillow is a clean conscience. Um, All right, so Joseph, let's see. So after that, Joseph died at 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. That's it. That's where it ends. He was placed in a coffin in Egypt. Boop. Okay. So he wasn't wrapped like a little package of bones where they could take it on a backpack and hit the road when Moses is going to show up. Now, question: where's the coffin? Where's the sarcophagus? If Joseph was living the life of an Egyptian, shouldn't there be a pyramid for Joseph and all that other stuff? Because that was like our current life insurance. We have burial rights in our life insurance, and that was their style of life insurance. They build the building, and there's some possessions and blah 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 and all that other stuff. However, the trust that we create today, and so I mean, you create a trust, and your money goes into that trust, and it gets dividends, and it gets separated to different beneficiaries and all that other stuff. This was that then, having a pyramid. So now, what happens to Joseph's sarcophagus? It is said, this is just a story. Please don't take it as Bible, but it's one of many. It is said that on the day that Moses is time to leave, he says he goes to the river Nile because he met a lady who was alive during the time of Joseph, and she was super ancient, and she tells him Joseph's sarcophagus was resealed several times, and it's covered with metal, and it's in somewhere in the Nile River. Okay, um, so what happens? So then, thank you for that, Ariel. Um, one of the things before I start, I'll just share that comment because it's actually a pretty interesting point. So it is said that the sarcophagus was the reason for the establishing the second, what is known by most people, Passover, due to the impurity of what the impurity of being in contact with a dead body. Very good point. As a matter of fact, that's an emphasis onto what I'm going to cover. It is said that Moses went to the river, stood by the river, and he said, Joseph, if you do not show up, me and all of Israel are free from the burden of having to carry you to Egypt because I can't find you and we got to rock and roll, brother. We got to go. And so it happened that the sarcophagus came up and they carried it. So a couple guys helped them carry it and they put it right next to the Araon, which is another box, okay, the Hebrew word for a sort of sarcophagus. And so Joseph's body, which is impure, was sitting next to the pure holy life of Torah, which was also sealed in a container. The Ten Commandments, all that other stuff, they were all in a container and they were side by side. What is the teaching here? It's that, the greatest impurity, death, was sitting next to the greatest purity, life. And on the out of Egypt, that's how they left. But when they get to where they need to go, the sarcophagus gets dropped off where it belongs, Joseph's cave, right? And as he was asked to his brothers promised to do so, and then the Raon, the container, moves on. So this presents a problem because then it would seem that, one of the two couldn't be with each other. Look, I'm bringing to you the things of mystery of the ancient days and stories for a reason. It's because in your mind, when you have, right, your left and your right side, and they're arguing against each other, a logic and an artistic, and the religious versus the feeling, the intelligence versus the thoughts. This is all about who we are. Sometimes you feel like you're a piece of crap and that you have done something so wrong that how could you possibly do something good? You are Israel. You are both of those sarcophaguses, and you have the power to choose which way to go. Um, Joseph's father wrestled against the angel of death and earned the title Israel, which is not just a name, but a title. And then all of the children of Israel also have the right to exercise and say, I too claim to be part of that group. It's kind of like saying, I believe in the Constitution, and I want to exercise my rights to that Constitution of the United States. Well, this is a different kind of Constitution. This is the Constitution of God and Israel as a people and as a man, and I want access to that. And you can overcome all your issues. So it's hard to understand that when you've suffered a lot of depression and everything else. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a personal level. I was a couch surfer for 2 years. What that means is that I was getting some, medical benefits from the VA veteran as a veteran, and I was living in at the not at the expense, but out of the kindness of people that I knew, that they were allowing me to live in their house for very little or no rent. And so long as there was some exchanges and what have you. And so I wasn't a complete, parasite sucking from society. There was some exchange, but either way, um, it just is not a very dignified way to living. I was depressed. I was lost in my thoughts, and I had a hard time seeing the world other than negative. I was dying. I was deceased without ease. And through a series of occurrences that would take too long to cover, I was injured on my neck several times, re-injured, and something happened, and I realized that I had held a lot of anger, a lot of resentment and hatred inside the area where I suffered 5 herniated discs. I had held that energy for 20 years. When I released it, from that moment on, I've never had another problem with my neck. And I started to recover, and I started to gain strength, and I started to build my muscles again, and I started to live healthy and happy. And I haven't had an issue with depression for more than a year. I haven't had an issue with feeling, distraught and confused for more than a year, because now I've changed my perception. I made that choice. Joseph means he who gathers all things, right? So you can gather the negative energy, and that's what you're going to put out, or you can gather the positive energy. My last point is, look, don't be so stuck on having to have everything just right the way you think it is. Accept life for what it is, live to the fullest, and make this year the best year of your time, the best year of your life. And things will change because you put in the time to change it. Okay, let me see here. Okay, it has just occurred to me that I actually have a key from life in Israel. Yes, that is true. Yes, you have a place of honor. That is correct. This is powerful. You are absolutely correct. You no longer have to feel ashamed because y- understand that the tribe of Joseph doesn't really exist today. It was replaced by his children who were not even people that were born in Israel proper. They were not part of that. Yeah, their grandpa was there, but they were already born in Egypt. So they were citizens of Egypt before they were blessed. And so he, Israel, the man Jacob, took two people that were foreigners from being Israelite, Jewish, however you want to call it, and he said, they are mine. He adopted them into the kingdom of Israel, the tribe of Israel, and put them at a highest place and said, all your brothers will bless you, will be blessed because of you, because they're going to say it with their lips. And we say that every night during our kiddush, during our time of Friday night, when we separate one day aside. That's when we say that may you be blessed as the sons of Jacob, which really are the two sons of Joseph. So very powerful. I hope there is there any more comments? I don't know if you can actually jump in there and talk back to me. I would love to have that. I love to have the back and forth discussion. And so with that being said, I've pretty much reached the end of what I wanted to cover. I hope it has been helpful to you to understand that, number one, things are not what the way we see them, right? Jacob was being buried and looked like an Egyptian, but he wasn't. And Joseph lived the life of an Egyptian for the job that he had, yet he was on all purposes there as a key employee, as a key position to help the people of Israel, all his family. And they had privilege and they were living in a different position. Now, so if you don't see these pieces, right, I say go back and read chapter from Genesis chapter 45 all the way to 50, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And last but not least is that a lot of times we think that everything has to be the way we want it, and that religious mindset sets in and says, this is unclean, I can't talk to you on this day, and that's all of that stuff. When in fact, sometimes when you're trying to get out of a situation, you have got to do things that are uncommon to you, that are indifferent, that are not indifferent, but they are just 100% out of the way you think, in order to get out of the mess that you just created. And the last piece is that you are called Israel. If you take on the mantle of the covenant, which says, I will wrestle with the angel of death and be victorious. What does that mean? That I will not let worrisome, the Mitzrayim, the word Egypt in Hebrew means to be in constraint, to be stressed, to be pulled in two different directions. How do you find peace? This is not something that's given to you. This is something that you create internally. And you do it through a total commitment to bettering yourself so that you can claim that Israel. You got to wrestle it. There's just no way around it. You're going to have to fight it. You got to fight depression. You got to fight negativity. And that happens by you making a consistent effort. If you want the details on how I did it, then I would say you leave me a comment below, and I can share you how I got there. And it's actually super easy. Look, you can reduce your level of stress by 50% in 24 hours. Now, I can promise you that because that's how I did it. All right. With that being said, I'll check you guys out. And until next week at the same time, shalom, which means peace.